Today, pre-cal students, we are going to look at two procedures in this video. Number one, we're going to learn how to convert degrees to radians, and then number two, we're going to learn how to convert radians to degrees. Your heading today, please write this down, is converting radian and degree measurement. Converting radian and degree measurement. Go ahead and write down today's date also, if you would please, so you have record in your notes as to when we covered this material. All right, let's continue on. Let's start first by converting degrees to radians, okay? Let's start first by converting degrees to radians. Anytime that you are converting degrees to radians, simply multiply the degrees by pi over 180. It's that easy. Okay, let's try a couple of examples. Again, anytime you are given degrees and you need to convert them over to radians, or I ask you to convert them over to radians, simply multiply the degrees given to you by pi over 180. Now, I do want to say this. Remember, if you ever want to see a picture of what you're doing, remember what we looked at before, okay? Anytime you go 90 degrees, that's pi over 2. Anytime you rotate 180 degrees, that's going to be pi. Anytime you rotate 270 degrees, that's going to be 1 1/2 pi, or 3 pi over 2. And anytime you rotate 360 degrees all the way around the entire circle like this, that's going to be 2 pi. Okay, and then of course if you cut this in half, 45 degrees would be pi over 4, etc. So you can use some shortcuts like that, and if you'll remember this picture, that will be a help to you in understanding what degrees and radians look like in comparison. Okay, but when it comes to converting quickly degrees to radians, all that you have to do is simply multiply the degrees by pi over 180. Now let's very quickly look at three examples, okay? All right, here we go. Let's convert 135 degrees over to radians, okay? Let's convert 135 degrees very quickly over to radians. Well, all that you have to do is put the 135 over 1 and multiply it by pi over 180. It's that quickly. And to be honest with you, students, your calculator will reduce this fraction for you. Let me show you what I mean. If I take 1, now you could try to cancel and see what number goes into 135 and see if that same number goes into 180. And that's a fine way to do it. But I would just use your calculator if I were you. 135 times pi is just 135 pi. And 1 times 180 is 180. And now the calculator you have, whether it's a graphing calculator or whether it is a scientific calculator that has an ABC button, something that looks like this, A, B, C, like this, any of those buttons will reduce fractions for you. And so go ahead and type into your calculator 135 divided by 180, and then go ahead and reduce that on your calculator, and you will get 3/4. And of course you still have your pi right here. Now up here at the beginning, if you would rather reduce these two numbers, you would have seen that 45 goes into 135 3 times, and 45 goes into 184 times. And then 3 times pi is 3 pi, and 1 times 4 is 4. Either way, either method is acceptable, but the main thing you need to understand is 135 degrees equals 3 pi over 4. That's pretty easy, okay? Now let's try another one. Let's try 540 degrees. Now you can work ahead or you can watch me. That's up to you. Let's go ahead and convert 540 degrees over to radians. I'm going to go ahead and put 540 over 1, and I'm going to multiply it by pi over 180. Now, if you do like to reduce first, or not reduce, but if you like to simplify first, that's fine. You will see that 180 does go into both of these numbers, and 180 goes into 180 once, and 180 goes into 540 three times. And that's one way to do it. 3 times pi would be 3 pi. 1 times 1 is 1. So you would get 3 pi over 1. And that's totally acceptable. Another way to do it is simply take 540 times pi, and that will give you 540 pi. And then 1 times 180 is 180. And then if you take your calculator and reduce this fraction, you will get 3 pi over 1. And of course, you're more than welcome to just write 3 pi for your answer. Okay? All right, pretty simple. You can work ahead and try this one on your own, or you can watch me. Okay, let's go ahead and convert negative 270 degrees, and we'll talk later about how you can have a negative angle, okay? But let's go ahead and convert negative 270 degrees over to radians. So we'll go ahead and put the 270 over 1, and then we're going to multiply it by pi over 180, okay? Now, if you want to cross cancel, 90 will go into both of these numbers. 90 will go into 180 2 times. 90 will go into negative 270 negative 3 times. Okay, so we have negative 3 times pi. That's negative 3 pi. And then 1 times 2 is 2. And of course, really, I would encourage you to write the negative sign really out front right here. And there we go. Negative 270 degrees is the exact same thing as negative 3 pi over 2. 540 degrees is the exact same thing as 3 pi. And 135 degrees is the exact same thing as 3 pi over 4. Okay, pretty simple. So that is how you convert degrees to radians. Now, in your homework and on your tests and quizzes, sometimes I will ask you to write your answer in terms of pi, and sometimes I will ask you to write your radians with a decimal. Now obviously 3 pi over 4 is written in terms of pi, or in other words with pi. But what if I would have asked you to write this answer right here with a decimal? Well, students, it's so easy. We're going to use 3.14 for pi. Now you're welcome to use the pi button on your calculator. I just use 3.14. So with my calculator, I'm going to type 3 times 3.14. And when I do that, I'm going to get 9.42, and then divide that by 4, and you will get, for a decimal, and I'm rounding to 1 decimal place, 2.355. I'm just going to go ahead and put 2.4. So go ahead and take notes on this, okay? So 135 degrees written in terms of pi is 3 pi over 4. If you're writing 135 degrees in radians in decimal form, then you're going to write 2.4. And of course, this right here is an approximation. It's rounded. Okay? If I ask you to write 540 degrees as radians in terms of pi, then you would have 3 pi. But if I wanted you to write this answer as a decimal, then you would take 3 times 3.14. and you would get 9.42 over 1, which of course is the exact same thing as just 9.42, okay, or 9.4. So there we go. Of course, this is an approximation. So sometimes you will be asked to write your radians in terms of pi. Sometimes you will be asked to write your radians as a decimal. Let's go ahead and do one more right here. I'm going to bring down my negative sign. I have 3 times pi, so 3 times 3.14, and then divided by 2, and you will get negative 1.884. Let me get a drink here real quick. And so there we go. Negative 270 degrees is negative 3 pi over 2 in radians, and it's also negative 1.884 in radians written as a decimal. So please know how to do those both ways. Okay? All right. The second thing we're going to look at, and we're just about finished here, is let's convert radians to degrees. Okay? So we just looked at converting degrees to radians. Now we're going to convert radians to degrees. In order to do this, you simply multiply the radians by 180 over pi. Now notice we just flipped or inverted the fraction. When you were converting degrees to radians just a second ago, you used you used pi over 180, correct? Well, now If we're converting radians to degrees, we flip that fraction and we simply multiply the radians by 180 over pi. It's that easy, okay? Let's try a couple of these. Here we go. Okay, let's convert negative pi over 2 to degrees. Now we should get 90, right? Remember our circle that we've looked at before, and here's pi over 2 right here, and of course that's also 90 degrees. So we should get 90 degrees. Let's see what happens. Let's take negative pi over 2 and let's multiply that by 180 over pi. Now first of all, you should notice your pi's will cancel. So there we go. And then next you should notice 2 goes into 2 and 2 goes into 180 90 times. And of course 1 times 90 is 90, and 1 times 1 is 1. 90 over 1 is the exact same thing as 90 degrees. Now don't forget to bring down your negative sign. We're converting negative pi over 2 to degrees, so you would get not 90 degrees, but you would get negative 90 degrees. That's really pretty simple, students, okay? You can try this one on your own, or you can watch me. We're going to convert radians to degrees. Radians to degrees. Well, whenever you do that, you take your radians and you multiply it by 180 degrees over pi. Well, first of all, your pi is going to cancel. Second of all, 2 goes into 2 one time, and 2 goes into 180 90 times. So really the only thing I'm left with over here is a 9, and 9 times 90 would be 810 degrees. And of course 1 times 1 is 1. If you want to put it over 1, I have no problem with that. But there we go. 9 pi over 2 is 810 degrees. And you can have angles larger than 360. We'll get into that later, okay? That's definitely possible, and we will talk about that later. So there we go. We're simply converting degrees to radians, radians to degrees, okay? Now, on our last example here, and you can work ahead or watch me, you might say, well, Mr. Earhart, how do we know that this is not degrees? Listen, anytime you're dealing with angle measurement and there's no little degree symbol, you automatically assume it is in radians, okay? So if there's a little degree symbol, it's in degrees. If there's not, then it's in radians. You say, well, Mr. Earhart, there's no pi symbol. Well, listen, remember, radians don't necessarily have to be written with the pi symbol. Okay, let's go back here and look at our decimals right here, okay? Remember, you could write 135 degrees as radians with pi, or you could write 135 degrees as radians without pi, just as a decimal, okay? So that's definitely possible to do, okay? So we're going to convert 2 radians over to degrees. Now, it might look a little confusing, but it really shouldn't be. Just do what I told you to do up here. You simply put the 2 over 1, and then anytime you're converting radians to degrees, you multiply the radians by 180 over pi. So we're going to multiply this by 180 degrees over pi, okay? And so 2 times 180 is 360, and 1 times pi is pi. And now simply take your calculator and type into your calculator 360 divided by pi, which is 3.14. And you will get out this for your degrees, 114.6496815. And of course it goes on and on. I'm just going to round that to 115 degrees. Where you will round depends on what the directions say to do in your homework or on a test or a quiz. Okay, so there we go. If you would just simply follow these instructions right here, okay, anytime you are converting degrees to radians, multiply the degrees by pi over 180. And anytime you're converting radians to degrees, you multiply the radians by 180 over pi. If you will do that, then of course the problems are pretty simple, okay? If you have any questions, don't hesitate to call or email me, and hopefully this video has been pretty easy to understand.